Welcome to the webinar, 5 Tips for Parents of Young Children, Ways to Encourage Positive Behavior. During this webinar, we're going to discuss some of the following ideas: some basic assumptions about behavior, the need to teach a skill versus punish, some things that children need in order to be successful, and 5 tips that you can use to encourage positive behavior in your young child. Some basic assumptions about behavior, the first one being that behavior has meaning. In other words, whatever a child is doing, the actions that a child is doing has a meaning to it, and our job is to be able to figure out what that meaning is. Behavior is an attempt to communicate. We need to understand the meaning of behavior in order to respond effectively to that child's behavior. And then finally, relationships are key for managing a child's behavior. Whenever we have a positive relationship with that child and the child feels that we are invested in that child and there is that ongoing relationship, it's going to be easier for that child to exhibit the types of behaviors that we want to see. Some ideas about challenging behavior. Ross Greene, who is the author of the book The Explosive Child, says that children do well if they can. If they can't, we need to figure out why so we can help them. Thus, the whole notion of trying to figure out what is the meaning or the intent behind the behavior. Every challenging behavior can be thought of as a child's solution to a problem and a form of communication. The child is trying to communicate something to us, and that's our job as to become kind of a mini detective and try to figure out what is that child trying to communicate, or what is it that the child's trying to solve by using that particular behavior. When we talk about punishment, some basic assumptions about a punishment is the fact that research shows that punishment doesn't really teach appropriate behavior. It can create resentment, revenge, even rebellion or retreat. Oftentimes, if a child is punished, that can only lead to more aggressive behavior. Punishment also teaches a child that it's acceptable to use power to control people. A child who is punished may behave just to keep from being punished and not learn to behave because he thinks it is the right thing to do. The purpose of punishment is to stop a child from doing what you don't want and using a painful or unpleasant method to stop him. Punishment may actually damage a child's self-esteem and self-concept because of the embarrassment and humiliation that a child may face because of punishment. On the other hand, if we teach appropriate skills, we're going to get a long-term solution to the problem. Teaching appropriate skills actually helps to build a child's self-esteem because it's teaching that child a new skill and a better way of getting their needs met. Teaching appropriate skills also teaches appropriate behavior skills. Teaching can help a child learn those appropriate skills needed in order to be successful at home, in a classroom, or in the community. If we teach the appropriate skills that a child needs, we will actually see challenging behaviors decreasing. Effective discipline helps children learn to control their behavior so that they act according to their ideas of what is right and wrong, not because they fear punishment. The other thing about teaching appropriate skills is it really separates the child from the behavior. The child is not thought of as being bad, but it's rather the behavior that is unacceptable. When we look at challenging behavior, we want to view it as an opportunity to teach skills that children will need for the rest of their lives, instead of viewing it as an occasion to punishment. Teaching a child early on the skills that they're going to need in order to be successful will only help them in their social relationship skills and help them as they learn to navigate the classroom environment. Some facts about behavior. As I said earlier, all behavior is a form of communication. There's always a reason for the challenging behavior. And again, it's our job as the adult to try to figure out what it is that the child is trying to say or communicate with this particular behavior. Adults can learn to understand and interpret the behavior. Some examples of some forms of communication that we're familiar with through behavior: an infant may cry when they're hungry or wet. It's the parent's job or the caregiver's job to figure out what does that cry mean. Adult may yawn when they're bored. A child's challenging behavior is a sign that he is upset and that something is not right. A child may not know the words to describe how they are feeling or what to do in a difficult situation, so they may use a challenging behavior to get attention, to stop an activity, or to avoid something unpleasant. When it comes to addressing challenging behaviors, the single best way to address them is to take steps to make sure that they never occur. Benjamin Franklin says an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. In this webinar, we will discuss some ideas that may help you prevent some challenging behaviors in your young child. Any behavior that persists is working for the child. A child is not going to continue a behavior if it doesn't help him or her to get their needs met. So our job then is to teach the child a socially acceptable way to get their needs met, or to help the child learn to use his or her voice instead of behavior to get the needs met. In some instances, when children do not have the language skills necessary to communicate appropriately, they will resort to using challenging behavior as a means of communication. A child who has limited social skills or has learned that challenging behavior will result in meeting his or her needs may also use challenging behavior instead of language. We have to acknowledge the power of the behavior because it has worked for the child in the past. Challenging behavior results in the child getting access to something or someone, which is a way of saying obtaining something, or avoiding something or someone, which is escape. Children need several things in order to be successful in their lives. They need unconditional love and support, even if the behavior is unacceptable. As you recall earlier, we mentioned that the key to helping a child with their challenging behaviors is that relationship with the child and the caregiver. A child needs that unconditional love and support in order to accept any kind of assistance from that caregiver. A child needs adult support and help when needed. When a child is exhibiting some challenging behaviors or it is in a social situation and they don't know how to respond, they need the support of us to help them to figure out how to deal with that situation. We need to help the child understand that feelings are okay, even if the way that they are expressing them is not. In other words, there is nothing wrong with feeling a particular emotion. It's what the child does with that emotion that we may have to struggle with, and we may need to teach the child a more acceptable way to get that need met. It's okay to make mistakes and that adults will help fix those big mistakes. A child needs to know that it's okay to make a mistake and that the adults and caregivers in their lives are going to help them figure out what to do about that mistake. And finally, it's very critical to a child's success that adults set limits in their lives. Often when young children exhibit challenging behavior, we become so frantic for a solution to the behavior, a way to make the behavior stop, that we forget to just have fun with our children. It's important that we do things to help a child feel good about themselves and to establish that positive relationship. When we actively build positive relationships with hugs, smiles, encouraging statements, listening, and playing, just a few ideas, it is as if we are filling or refilling our child's gas tank. When we fill or refill our child's gas tank, we are strengthening our relationship with that child and building their competence and confidence in how they behave. The more we fill or refill their tanks, the more confidence they will have in developing relationships with others. It is important to remember that building positive relationships is mainly about positive time and attention and not giving your child things. So you don't have to have a lot of money or purchase a lot of material things. It's more about the relationship and the time and attention that we give to our children. Some tips to help you deal with challenging behaviors or how to avoid challenging behaviors. Tip number 1, provide appropriate expectations. We want to make sure that the things that we are expecting from our children are developmentally appropriate. In order to do that, you need to be aware of your child's current developmental level. We need those expectations to be clear and consistent. In other words, if you have some expectations for your child, it's important that those expectations are carried out every day of the week, no matter where the child is. And sometimes this is going to require coordinating with grandparents, other relatives, other caregivers to make sure that everyone is having the same expectations and that the child doesn't learn how to play off one setting against the other or one adult against the other. We want to make sure that the expectations are appropriate for the child's temperament and disability and within the limits of predictable routines. Some expectations that you might want to think about, how about identifying the most important rules or expectations for your home? Once you establish those rules or expectations, you want to make sure that the child understands the expectations, and then you're going to have to make sure that those expectations are taught during daily routines. It's going to be important that you consistently point out and reinforce your child for following rules and expectations. Remember, it's better to be consistent with 5 rules 100% of the time than with 10 rules 50% of the time. Most adults set too many rules. So I would say for the average young child, 3 household rules may be more than enough, or 3 classroom rules may be more than enough to allow the child to be able to really follow those rules with a great deal of consistency. Expectations must be consistent across environments, as I made that point before. This means all family members and child care providers must be on the same page with expectations and rules. If there are consequences that have been established, they must be followed through by everyone. Children should know the schedule of each day's events. It's important to eliminate unnecessary transitions and avoid changes when possible, particularly if you have a child where transition and change are very difficult to deal with. If there do need to be changes in everyday life, we know that those things happen. It's important that you take the time to prepare your child in advance for that change. So if in a given week the child is not going to be going to the child care provider, or maybe not going to a preschool classroom, or maybe there's a family activity that needs to be changed, as soon as you are aware of that change, working with the child to explain that change and talking about it ahead of time will help the child to prepare for that change. Helping those expectations to be attainable, maybe some suggestions, breaking jobs into smaller tasks. I'll get the blocks if you pick up the puzzle pieces. When it comes time for transitions, the other thing that might be helpful is the use of visual schedules, timers, 5-minute warnings, or a countdown. If your child is engaged in a favorite activity and you know that transition is going to be hard, giving your child that 5-minute warning and maybe setting a timer will help the child to ease into that change or that transition and move on to the next activity. That's going to be much easier than if you spring it on him or her at the very last minute, because they may not be able to move that quickly with the transition. Tip number 2, the use of positive communication. It's particularly important that we catch a child being good. Acknowledge their attempts, even if not totally successful. We need to make it clear to our children that it's okay to make mistakes, that we can pick up the pieces and go forward. And sometimes as we're teaching a new skill, the child may not be totally successful, but we want to make sure that we acknowledge that attempt in order to have them continue to try to go forward with that attempt. When we're praising a child, use specific praise. I like the way you did picking up your toys, or playing with Susie, or sharing with Johnny, versus good job. Using the phrase good job is not explicit enough to the child, and it doesn't help the child to know what skill it is that we're praising so that they can continue to use that skill in other situations. The other thing that's important is telling your child what to do instead of what not to do. Children often hear the very last words that we say, so telling them right up front what it is that we want them to do will help make that clearer in their mind. Research supports better outcomes when desired behavior is rewarded and reinforced. Children need to be encouraged for their efforts as well as their successes. Using encouragement can help decrease desired behaviors and decrease unwanted behaviors. Encouragement takes very little time and is a very effective way to promote positive behaviors. And the good news is, encouragement doesn't cost anything. There are ways of using encouragement that may be verbal and nonverbal. So the praise, I like the way you hung up your jacket, I like the way you washed your hands before dinner, would be an example of a verbal acknowledgement. Nonverbal may simply be a high five, a thumbs up, a hug, any kind of gesture to help the child know that you're noticing what he or she is doing well. Oftentimes when children are out playing with other children and they're working on a particular social skill, without butting in and interrupting the play, showing the child from a distance that high five or that thumbs up gives that child that sense of encouragement and lets them know that they can continue on and should continue on doing what it is that they're doing. Some examples of using positive language, telling your child what to do instead of what not to do. Use the phrase, use walking feet, versus telling a child, don't run. Use the phrase, use a calm voice, versus telling a child to stop whining or stop yelling. Using the phrase, stay in bed, versus the phrase, don't get out of bed. Those things all go to serve to tell the child exactly what it is that we want them to do, and that's the command, or that's the request that they're going to hear in their head. Tip number 3, offer choices. It's important that we give a child choices whenever possible. Giving a choice gives that child a sense of control, which as they get older, they desperately need. For a younger child, you may want to limit it to 2 choices. Do you want to wear the pink shirt or the blue shirt? When it comes time to bathroom chores, do you want to wash your face first or brush your teeth first? Simple choices will help your child feel more in control and therefore better able to cooperate. Make sure that they are choices you can live with. They are useful for children who try to escape activities, who like to demonstrate control over activities, and are also useful for children who are reinforced by being given choices. It may make them feel big and important, and it may reduce some of that escape behavior. Tip number 4, teach ways to express emotions. Emotional literacy is the ability to identify, understand, and express emotions. Young children deal with many of the same emotions that adults do. Children get angry, sad, frustrated, nervous, happy, and embarrassed, but they often do not have the words to talk about what they are feeling. Instead, they sometimes act out these emotions in very physical and inappropriate ways. Children need adults to connect words to feelings that they are having. Having a word for the feeling gives the child the message that I am not the only one who feels this way, so I must be okay. Some things that we can do then would be to model and to teach appropriate ways to express emotions. If I know this feeling has a name, I can be more in control of it. I learn to express my emotions by watching those around me. Some things that you can do to help a child learn how to express emotions and understand emotions would be to label your own feelings during the day in front of your children. Observe children and label their feelings as they experience them. Talk about feelings displayed by characters in books, television, or videos. There are some wonderful books out there that deal with feelings, and being able to access those from the library, and then sitting and reading with your child and talking about the various emotions discussed in that book is a very pleasant, helpful way to deal with teaching your child about emotions. And it also gives that child that one-on-one time that is so important as we're trying to establish a close relationship with a child. Play games and sing songs involving feelings. I'm sure all of you are familiar with the most famous songs about feelings, if you're happy and you know it. But there are many other songs out there that you might be able to sing that will give the child that same sense of learning about feelings. Allow children to feel a range of emotions, but teach them healthy ways to express them. Then reinforce the child's effort to express their feelings in healthy ways. Differentiate the feeling from the way it is expressed. In other words, you're mad, but hitting is not okay. Use your words and say, I'm mad. You may want to help your child identify the end to a big feeling. After a child has maybe had a temper tantrum or exhibited some very challenging situation. Wow, you were really mad. Are you all done being mad? Then follow up with a hug or some other way of reassuring the child that the relationship is intact. Remember, we said earlier that a child needs to know that it's okay to express emotions, and even if they have a tough time, that the adults are there in the room to help them to control that. And once the situation is over, then the child can go back to just being a child and have that relationship restored with the adult and know that everything's going to be okay. Tip number 5, remember that you are the adult. Try to keep a sense of humor. Children will say things that can be particularly hurtful, but seldom do they mean them. So look for the humor in the situation. Find ways to care for yourself and find balance in your life. Take a walk. Read articles or books on challenging behaviors and ways to deal with them. Talk with other parents who may be parenting a child similar to your child's age or developmental level. Find out what's going on with theirs and any tips that they have learned and how to deal with their child. I was listening to a radio show a couple weeks ago, and moms were talking about how difficult it is to try to get some time away. One mom commented that she has 7 children, ages 3 to 21, and darned if every time she locks the bathroom door, they don't all show up looking for something from her. It's important as parents that we set the tone for our children and set the example of taking time for ourselves to just try to decompress and restore and get some calmness in our lives. So taking that 5 minutes for yourself on a daily basis may be just all you need in order to cope in a particularly difficult situation. Get support from understanding, non-judgmental adults, making sure that you have access to friends and other parents who are going through situations will be helpful to you, particularly people who aren't going to judge you and ask why you can't be a better parent or why you are not disciplining your child. No one knows your child like you do, and you do not want to be hearing criticism from others about the way that you're disciplining. Remember, your child is a unique individual. Don't compare your child to someone else. No 2 children are the same. No 2 children develop at the same point in time. So make sure that you understand that your child is unique. And finally, don't compare your child to someone else, and don't take what the child says seriously. As I said earlier, children often say things in a fit of anger. I recall when my children were young, there were some things said that if I had taken them seriously, would have been very hurtful to me and would have actually made me really question my ability to parent. But then everything dies down, everybody gets over their anger, and you realize that even though the child tells you that you're the worst mom or dad in the world, or that they wish they could run away from home, or they wish they could live with another family, those are all things that are simply said in anger, and we need to just to be able to listen, let the child state them, and then not take it seriously and go on with our lives and our relationship building with the skills. Here is our contact information if you have any questions about this webinar, or if you are dealing with some challenging behaviors and would like some additional resources on how to deal with them. Feel free to contact us here at Pacer Center. Thanks for viewing the webinar. If you've enjoyed this webinar, please take a brief moment to complete the survey that can be found on this webpage. Again, if you have any questions, please contact Pacer and ask to speak with an advocate. Thank you.